History, sometimes, is a compromised lie, or, more cruelly, a silence that lasts for millennia. When it comes to black people, textbooks often begin with images of slave ships crossing the Atlantic, beginning with chains, whips, and vast fields of blood-soaked, tear-filled white cotton. But that's not the beginning, that's the break. Before the legendary Silk Road connected East and West, before the Western empires rose and claimed themselves the cradle of civilization, there existed powerful dynasties of black people stretching from the banks of the Nile to the Ganges Valley. They did not come to the East to bow down, they came to rule. They were the kings of Mesopotamia, the invincible warriors of the Indian Ocean, the architects of brilliant civilizations whose ruins we still admire today with awe. Why have we forgotten them? Why have the black monarchs with their supreme power in Asia vanished from the flow of human memory? Has history been rewritten to serve a new world order? Today, we will not talk about pain. We will talk about power. We will seek out the crowns buried in the dust of time. To prove a stark truth, they were never merely slaves. If you, too, are eager to rediscover the lost pieces of human history, please take a moment to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Your support is the guiding light for us on this dusty archaeological journey. The journey begins, in the dawn of time. Before the concepts of national borders or skin color became barriers dividing humanity, the world operated on the rhythm of survival and exploration. We often assume that Africa is a closed continent, waiting for the outside world to explore it, but the truth of geology and anthropology tells a completely different story. Africa is not a forgotten place, but the heart that pumps blood to nourish the entire human body. Before the brilliant civilizations along the Yellow River or the Indus River were named, people from the Black Continent began the greatest journey in human history, a journey carrying the flame of life and wisdom towards the rising sun. These were not migrations of the weak fleeing natural disasters, but the footsteps of pioneering conquerors carrying within them the genes of adaptation and the ability to master harsh nature. Imagine a world without maps, where the only compasses are the stars and the course of the great rivers. The first groups of black people crossed the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, what we now call the Gate of Tears, to set foot on the Arabian Peninsula and from there spread across the Asian continent. They didn't go empty. They brought with them stoneworking techniques, animal taming skills, and, most importantly, a deeply ingrained system of nature worship. Archaeological findings in coastal caves of southern India or sites in ancient Mesopotamia reveal undeniable anthropological characteristics. Skulls, bone structures, and even ancient genetic material all point in one direction: Africa. But why are these details so important in the story of these forgotten dynasties? Because to understand rule, one must understand presence. You cannot rule a land if you were not a part of it from its very beginnings. The presence of black people in the ancient East was not an invasion by outsiders, but rather a foundational development. Before the concepts of Aryan or Semitic races emerged and dominated epic narratives, the indigenous populations of many fertile lands in Asia already possessed morphological characteristics of Africans. They laid the first bricks for city-states, observed the moon's movement to create calendars, and transformed riverine swamps into rice paddies that sustained entire communities. It was on this solid foundation of pioneering peoples that later dynasties could form and flourish. History has cleverly concealed this truth by calling them unknown prehistoric tribes, but a deeper look into legends, ancient reliefs, and even language reveals their imposing and proud presence. We need to change our perspective on the concept of black people in the ancient context. It wasn't simply a skin color designation used to distinguish social classes, as it was in later colonial times. In the ancient world, black skin was the color of fertile land, the color of rain-bearing clouds, and the color of sacred mystery. The oldest gods of the East were often depicted with dark skin, not by chance, but as a reflection of the very people who created that image. When people from Africa migrated deep into the Asian continent, they blended with the land and sky, creating communities that history later called by different names such as the Sumerians, Elamites, or Dravidians. But the blood flowing in their veins still bore the strong imprint of their African origins. They were not slaves bought. They were the first masters, the ones who held the keys to civilization before the doors of legitimate history were opened. Their path was not paved with roses, but with the harsh trials of nature. From the scorching deserts of Arabia to the tropical rainforests of South Asia, every step was a struggle for survival. But it was in this harshness that the qualities of future rulers were forged. They learned water management, how to build strong fortifications to defend against wild animals and enemies, and how to organize society according to a hierarchical order. These skills were not born naturally. They were the accumulated experience from thousands of years of their ancestors' conquest of nature on the mother continent. When we look at the ruins of ancient civilizations in the East, let us not only look at the inanimate stones, but listen to the echoes from the past. The echoes of those black people who once stood atop the pyramids of power, looking down upon the empires they built with sweat and intellect, not with humble servitude. The historical oblivion of this period is not accidental, but a tragedy of perception. As Western empires rose and rewrote world history, they needed a narrative befitting their position as rulers. They could not accept that the people they were enslaving were descendants of the kings who had taught their ancestors how to write or cultivate crops. Thus, a dark veil was drawn, obscuring the glory of the past. Statues were defaced to conceal anthropological features. Ancient texts were missed, and biased scientific theories were constructed to separate black people from their great heritage in the East. But the truth, like a seed buried deep in the earth, no matter how long it is buried, will sprout again with a single rain shower, and that rain is our awakening today. As we begin to piece together the fragments of the past to see the bigger picture, our journey has only just begun, taking its first steps out of Africa, but it has already opened up a new horizon of understanding. We see that black people did not appear in Eastern history as marginalized, but as the main current, the foundation, the roots. From those roots, the great trees of dynasties like Sumer and Elam would sprout, their branches spreading to cover a vast expanse of history. But to better understand how they transformed from migrants into kings, from nomadic tribes into empire builders, we need to delve deeper into the heart of the cradle of human civilization, where those who called themselves the black people wrote the first chapters of human history in cuneiform script on clay, asserting their unique position in the flow of time. Part 2. Sumer and the black-haired people, the first owners of civilization. If the Great Migration mentioned earlier was a pioneering step, then the stopping point in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was the moment humanity decided to cease wandering and begin building permanent homes. Mesopotamia, the alluvial land that we now call Iraq, is often honored as the cradle of civilization. But who rocked that cradle? Who molded those lifeless lumps of clay into monuments containing the wisdom of an entire era? Mainstream history often speaks of the Sumerians with respect for their inventions such as writing, the wheel, and law, but often avoids or obscures their true identity. In the oldest surviving texts, the Sumerians called themselves by a proud and mysterious name, Sag-Giga. In their language, this word means people with black heads. For centuries, Western scholars have attempted to interpret the phrase, black-headed people, in a milder way, suggesting it simply referred to the black hair color used to distinguish them from other ethnic groups or simply as a general term for humanity. However, if Sag-Giga is placed in the context of the migration flows from Africa that we have analyzed, this phrase carries a much deeper meaning regarding racial origins. It is an affirmation of identity, of the bloodline and skin color of the first creators. They were not light-skinned Semites from the north, nor were they later Indo-Aryan peoples. They were direct descendants of prehistoric people from the Nile River Valley and the Horn of Africa, bringing with them knowledge of water management and sun worship to the new land. The striking similarities between the language, grammatical structure, and mythological systems of ancient Sumerians and African languages cannot be merely a coincidence. Imagine the first cities rising amidst the flooded plains, where the ziggurat temples soared like steps reaching for the sky. The architects of these great structures, who calculated the cycles of the moon and stars to create the calendar, were the Black Sumerians. They transformed the barren reed-filled land into fields of abundant wheat thanks to a complex irrigation system, a technique they seem to have inherited genetically from their days living along the Nile. In that society, black was not a symbol of darkness or evil, as later Western culture attributed it, but rather a symbol of life, fertile land, and sacred origins. Ancient statues found at archaeological sites such as Ur and Ur, although many have had their noses broken off, a deliberate act by later invaders to erase anthropological features, still reveal an undeniable truth about the appearance of these early kings: their large eyes, thick lips, and facial structure. The greatest contribution of the Sumerians and the greatest legacy that ancient peoples left to humanity in the East was writing. When the first cuneiform characters were inscribed on clay, history began to be recorded, ending a dark period of oblivion. But pay attention to the content of those texts. They didn't just record deaths or harvests. They wrote about gods, about the origins of kingship descended from heaven. In the Sumerian mind, they were the chosen ones, the keepers of cosmic order amidst chaos. Their legal system, the precursor to the later Code of Hammurabi, was based on the principles of justice and protection of the weak, a humanistic mindset thousands of years ahead of its time. Could a primitive or slave people have produced such profound philosophical and sociological ideas? The answer is certainly no. Only those in positions of power, those with the mindset of emperors, could establish such a sophisticated social order. However, the tragedy of the Sumerians, and indeed the common tragedy of ancient black civilizations, was invasion and assimilation. The fertile land of Mesopotamia was a tempting target for nomadic tribes from the northern mountains and western deserts. Over time, the Akkadians, Babylonians, and later the Assyrians poured in, bringing with them their languages and cultures. A process of interbreeding occurred, and gradually, the original black-headed anthropological characteristics were diluted. But remarkably, even in the face of military conquest, Sumerian culture ultimately conquered its victors. Later empires had to learn the Sumerian script, worship Sumerian gods, and replicate the Sumerian model of state administration. They revered the wisdom of these ancient black people to such an extent that they considered the Sumerian language sacred, used only in solemn religious ceremonies, much like how Europeans later used Latin. Modern history often tends to separate the Sumerians from their African context, viewing them as an isolated group of unknown origin. This is a short-sighted and unfair perspective. When we look at the ancient skulls unearthed at the royal cemeteries of Europe, honest anthropologists must acknowledge the distinct Negroid characteristics, even in epics like Gilgamesh, the first literary work of humankind. Descriptions of the hero, of strength, and of connection with wild nature are imbued with the spirit of the African continent. Gilgamesh, the demigod king of Uruk with his unparalleled strength seeking immortality, is a reflection of the aspirations of a people who refuse to accept finitude, a people who want to engrave their name eternally in stone and terracotta. The collapse of the Sumerian dynasties around 2000 BC was not the end, but a transition. The black people did not disappear completely. They blended into the population flow, moving eastward, bringing their knowledge and techniques to new lands. Their legacy is not only found in the desolate mounds of present-day Iraq, but also spread to neighboring Elam and further afield to the Indus Valley. They proved that black people were not only capable of adapting but also capable of building foundations. Before Greece or Rome, before Western philosophy emerged, black sages along the Euphrates River discussed ethics, the universe, and the meaning of life. We need to restore the Sumerians to their true identity, not to sow discord or demand rights, but to respect historical truth. Acknowledging that humanity's first civilization was built by people of color would fundamentally change how we view the capabilities and position of black people in world history. They were not latecomers, beggars of the past. They were pioneers, the first teachers of humanity. The mud bricks they laid under the Mesopotamian sun 5,000 years ago are still there, as strong and enduring as their own will. Even if dust buries them, even if other empires build upon them, the most solid foundation will still belong to the Sagaga people. The journey of this bloodline did not end in Mesopotamia. As pressure from the northern tribes grew, a segment of the elite and warriors of ancient black people continued to move eastward to a rugged but resource-rich mountainous land where they would build another, powerful kingdom, serving as a bridge between the two worlds. That was Elam. But the story of Elam and the forgotten black kings in Persian epics is another dramatic and tragic chapter that we will uncover together. Prepare yourselves, for we are about to enter a land where military might and artistic sophistication intertwine, under the hands of proud black people. Part 3, Elam, a bridge between two worlds and power on the Zagros Range. If Mesopotamia was the gentle cradle of human civilization, then Elam was the steel fortress, the forging ground for the most tenacious warrior dynasties of antiquity. Located southwest of present-day Iran, Elam was more than just a nation. It was a vital link between two worlds, the world of the Mesopotamian city-states in the west and the mysterious world of the Indus Valley in the east. For millennia, official history has often referred to Elam as merely a spoiler to the Babylonian or Assyrian empires, or worse, as a faint precursor to the Persians. But when one strips away the biases of Western historians and looks deeply into the glazed reliefs at Susa, a different truth emerges about the identity of the rulers of this land, one that is haunting and powerful. They were black people, blood relatives of the Sumerians and Ethiopians, and transformed the barren, rocky mountains into an empire that commanded respect throughout the East. Consider the artistic legacy left by the Elamites on the magnificent glazed tile walls of the Susa Palace. Images of Elamite warriors appear with dark ebony-colored skin, characteristic tightly braided curly hair, and thick, resolute lips. This is not a random artistic stylization, but a true depiction of the race that ruled this land. Pioneering anthropologists and archaeologists of the 19th century, when excavating here, were astonished by the striking similarities between the ancient Elamites and the peoples of Africa today. They called Elam the land of the dark-skinned Easterners, where the genetic material from the mother continent still flowed strongly in the veins of the kings. Even the name Elam in ancient languages implied highlands, a dwelling place of valiant and free people who would not bow to any foreign power. The position of Elam was far more important than we often think. They were not just warriors, they were brilliant merchants and protectors of culture. Strategically located on the vital trade route connecting east and west, Elam controlled the flow of precious stones, metals, and spices. It was through the hands of the Elamites that cultural influences from Africa and Mesopotamia were transmitted to India. And conversely, the mystical philosophies of the East entered the Western world. They were a great bridge, but an armed one. Unlike the Sumerians, who were more agricultural and religious in their thinking, the Elamites developed a powerful military culture to survive among the greedy neighboring empires. History records instances of Elamite armies sweeping across the Mesopotamian plains like black storms, conquering Babylonian cities and bringing back invaluable spoils of war. One of the clearest proofs of the power of the Black Elamites was their act of stealing the famous Hammurabi Code from the Babylonians and displaying it in their capital Susa. This was not merely an act of robbery, it was a declaration of political power. Through this action, the Elamite kings wanted to assert that the law and order of the world were now in their hands. The The great kings of the Kshatriya dynasty, with black blood flowing through their veins, built the colossal ziggurat temples at Chagas Anil, an architectural marvel that still stands today, defying time. Their architecture combines the profound mystery of the East with the grandeur and solidity of African stone structures, creating a unique and unmistakable style. However, the rise of the Aryan concept and the expansion of later Persian empires gradually pushed the Elamites into the shadows. When the Persians, a light-skinned people from the north, began to dominate Iran, they carried out a cultural and historical blood transfusion. Although they inherited almost the entire administrative system, writing, and art of the Elamites, they deliberately obscured the racial origins of their predecessors. Nevertheless, historical truth has its own powerful force, even in the famous immortals of the later Persian Empire. Ancient Greek historians like Herodotus describe the presence of warriors with dark skin and curly hair from Elam, considered the most elite and brave. They were remnants, living witnesses of an old dynasty that had merged with a new current but was not completely dissolved. The tragedy of Elam is the tragedy of a civilization caught between fierce geopolitical changes. They fought relentlessly for thousands of years to protect their identity. From wars against the Sumerians and Babylonians to bloody confrontations with the brutal Assyrians, the Elamites were never easily subdued. The eventual fall of Susa and the devastation inflicted by the Assyrian army are described as one of the most horrific tragedies of the ancient world. But even when the city was razed to the ground and salt was sprinkled on the land so that nothing could grow again, the spirit of the Elamites did not die. It lingered in the mountain tribes, mingled with the blood of the local population, so that today, in the Khuzestan region of Iran, we still encounter faces with the familiar features of our black ancestors, a silent reminder of their glorious past. Elam is not just a chapter in history about war. It is a lesson in interaction and adaptation. They demonstrated that ancient black peoples were not confined to the African continent, capable of building and sustaining complex states at the heart of global power struggles. They were the great gatekeepers of the East, holding the flame of civilization alive before handing it over to succeeding empires. Without Elam, the connection between Mesopotamia and India might have been broken, and the course of human civilization might have taken a slower, different path. As we leave the brick ruins of Susa, leaving behind the majestic Zagros Mountains, the echoes of history beckon us to continue our journey eastward. There, beyond the mountains and deserts, lies a fertile river valley, home to one of the greatest mysteries of human history, an almost impossibly perfect urban civilization, cities planned like a chessboard, a modern drainage system, and the people who built it remain a major question. Did the footsteps of black migrants reach there? How deep was the connection between the Dravidians of India and the ancient Africans? The answers await us beneath the dust of time in Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Part 4. The mystery of the Indus Valley and the mark of the Dravidians. If Egypt had the pyramids to reach for the stars and Mesopotamia had the temples of ziggurat to communicate with the gods, the Indus Valley chose a completely different way to express its greatness, the order and convenience of human life. At a time when much of Europe was still struggling in thatched huts and caves, in Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, an incredibly complex urban civilization was emerging. The chessboard-like city planning, the sophisticated underground drainage system that would take the Romans thousands of years to replicate, the perfectly aligned brick houses all raise one big question. Who were the true owners of this wonder? For a long time, colonial historians tried to attribute this achievement to white peoples or Aryans from the north, but the fired bricks here whisper a different story, the story of people of color, the ancient Dravidians, descendants of proud African blood. Look at the bronze statue of the dancing girl found at Mohenjo-Daro, one of the most precious treasures of world archaeology. She stands there, hands on hips, head held high, with curly hair, full lips, and the unmistakable features of a black woman. She is not a slave. Her posture is that of freedom, of a free spirit mastering life. It is the most vivid evidence, surpassing any distorted text, affirming the identity of the people who built this civilization. Modern anthropological and genetic studies have shown a close connection between the Dravidians, the indigenous peoples of India, and the Elamites, and further afield, other ethnic groups in East Africa. They were the next link in the chain of black civilizations, stretching from the Nile to the Indus, a powerful black belt that once dominated the ancient world before the concept of the Silk Road emerged. The Indus Valley civilization did not collapse due to war or incompetence, but rather seems to have been buried by climate change and then by the invasion of nomadic, light-skinned Aryan tribes from the north around 1500 BC. This was a painful turning point in the history of black people in the East. The Aryans, with their nomadic and warlike culture, clashed with the peaceful and prosperous urban civilization of the Dravidians. In the oldest Vedic texts, we find descriptions of fierce battles between Aryan warriors and the indigenous people known as Dasa or Dasu. These enemies are described as having dark skin, flat noses, and speaking a strange language. This rudimentary form of racial discrimination was the seed for the later harsh caste system in India, where the darker the skin, the lower the social status. However, historical truth is not easily erased. Despite being relegated to a lower class in the new society, Despite being pushed to the south of the Indian subcontinent, the cultural legacy left by the Black Dravidians is immeasurable. Consider the most powerful deities in the Hindu belief system today. Lord Krishna, whose name in Sanskrit means black or dark blue. Lord Shiva, the destroyer and creator, is also often depicted with dark skin, dreadlocks characteristic of black people, and a distinctly non-Aryan origin. These deities did not come from the nomadic culture of the north. They were the original gods of the land, of the Dravidians, adopted and assimilated by the Aryans. This demonstrates that, despite losing political power, the spiritual and cultural strength of black people still dominates the consciousness of an entire subcontinent. Another interesting fact is that maritime trade links between the Indus Valley and East Africa existed much earlier than we imagine. Beads, pottery, and even plants originating from Africa have been found at the Harappa sites. This shows that the people of the Indus Valley did not simply remain confined to their brick cities. They exchanged goods, but more importantly, they exchanged ideas, forging a network of intercontinental civilizations that the West later became completely unaware of. The decline of the Indus cities and the forced southward migration of the Dravidians was a tragedy, but also the beginning of a new chapter. In South India, these black people went on to build magnificent kingdoms, grand stone temples, and one of the richest Tamil literatures in the world. They steadfastly preserved their language, skin color, and identity against the tide of assimilation. Today, when we look at the people of South India, or the city tribes who still retain their African features, we are seeing living witnesses to a lost golden age. They are descendants of the brilliant engineers who designed humanity's first drainage system, the children of those who taught the world what civilized urban planning was. History has deliberately whitewashed the Indus Valley civilization, intentionally separating it from its black origins to create a linear historical narrative pleasing to Western audiences. But the silent ruins along the Indus River still stand there, steadfast and patient. They await the day they are restored to their rightful place and ownership. We need to understand that the wisdom of the East, the cradle of yoga, meditation, and profound philosophies of the universe, owes a significant part to the intellect and spirit of black people. They were not merely manual laborers. They were thinkers, builders of the spiritual foundation for all of humanity. As the sun sets over the desolate mounds of Mohenjo-Daro, darkness envelops the ancient streets, but it is not the darkness of fear. It is the serene darkness of history, where the souls of old black people smile, knowing that their story is finally being told. The Arabian Peninsula, which today we often think of only light-skinned Arabs, was in the distant past the home of powerful black kings and queens. Part 6. Queen Sheba and the Ethiopian Bloodline, the soft power of the black people in the endless stream of ancient legends. Few figures are as both real and surreal. As captivating and majestic as the Queen of Sheba, the Bible calls her the Queen of the South. Muslims revere her as Bilqis, and in the heroic Ethiopian epic Kebra Nagast, she is known as Makeda, the great mother of the nation. Regardless of the name, her image remains consistent. A black queen with absolute power, ruling an empire that stretched across the Red Sea, encompassing present-day Ethiopia and Yemen. Her existence is the most powerful refutation of the historical stereotypes that black women played only secondary or slave roles. No, Makeda did not bow to anyone. She was the one who commanded the respect of the wisest Jewish king, Solomon. Imagine her legendary journey to Jerusalem in the 10th century BC. It wasn't a tributary visit, but a summit meeting between two equal powers. Her entourage stretched for miles across the desert, carrying treasures unseen by the Western world, 120 talents of pure gold, countless precious stones, and exquisite spices whose fragrance could intoxicate anyone. This wealth didn't fall from the sky. It was a testament to the prosperity of the Sheba kingdom, a trading empire that held a monopoly on the spice trade route. But what impressed Solomon wasn't just the gold and silver, but the wisdom of the black woman before him. She came to test his intellect with challenging riddles, metaphors about the universe and human existence. Their dialogue was a crossroads of two great civilizations, where African wisdom and Middle Eastern philosophy blended together. The relationship between Solomon and Sheba was not merely diplomatic or romantic. It forged a political and spiritual lifeline that lasted for thousands of years. The result of that fateful encounter was the birth of Menelik I, the first king of the Solomonic dynasty in Ethiopia. Consider the immense significance of this event. Half of the Ethiopian founding king's bloodline was Jewish, directly connected to the lineage of David and Abraham. This placed Ethiopia, and more broadly, the black people, at the center of monotheistic religious history. According to Ethiopian legend and unwavering belief, when Menelik I came of age and visited his father in Jerusalem, he brought the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred object containing the 10 Commandments, back to the city of Aksum. This act carries profound symbolic significance. God's grace has shifted from the Middle East to Africa. transforming Ethiopia into a second Zion, the new holy land for the elect. The Solomonic dynasty, established by the son of Queen Sheba, became one of the longest-lasting dynasties in human history, lasting continuously until 1974 when Emperor Haile Selassie was overthrown. For nearly 3,000 years, the Black Kings of Ethiopia held their heads high as King of Kings, Negusa Nagast, the Lion of Judah. They never considered themselves inferior to Western dynasties. It was this pride in their divine lineage that made Ethiopia the only nation in Africa never completely colonized. As European powers carved up the African continent, Ethiopia stood firm as a bastion of freedom, defeating the invading Italian army in the glorious Battle of Odwa in 1896. That strength, that spirit, stemmed from the very legacy left by Queen Sheba, a sense of self-worth and the sacred right to rule. But the influence of the Queen of Sheba was not limited to Ethiopia. Her rule over Yemen across the Red Sea left a profound mark on Arab culture. She was a model of a powerful female leader in a world often dominated by men. The irrigation systems, dams, and trade routes her dynasty built laid the foundation for the prosperity of the entire South Arabian region for centuries to come. Her story reminds us that the Red Sea was never a racial divide. It was an internal lake of the Black Empire, where cultural exchange, genetic exchange, and trade flourished. Black people were not strangers in the East. They were relatives, neighbors, and sometimes respected rulers. Western history, in its attempts to whitewash great figures, often tries to portray the Queen of Sheba with light skin or obscure her African origins in works of art. But the oldest texts, the carvings in the Lalibela rock churches, and the oral folklore all affirm her as a stunningly beautiful black woman. Her beauty was not a fragile beauty needing protection, but rather the beauty of power, wisdom, and an iron will. She represented a matriarchal era where women held supreme spiritual and political roles, before patriarchal social structures gradually took over. The legacy of the Queen of Sheba is also a reminder of the wealth of ancient Africa. Her caravans laden with gold and spices were not fiction. Archaeological studies in the Tigray region, Ethiopia, and Yemen have uncovered the remains of bustling trading cities, ancient gold mines, and magnificent temples dating back to her reign. She was not merely a religious legend. She was a historical reality. She demonstrated that black people knew how to exploit resources, organize international trade, and use that wealth to enhance their diplomatic standing from a very early age. As darkness descended upon the hills of Jerusalem after her entourage departed, Sheba left behind more than just material gifts. She left behind an obsession, an awe in the minds of Eastern historians. She sowed in history a seed of black greatness, a seed that sprouted into the mighty Aksumite Empire, the resilient Nubian dynasties, and the enduring pride of the Ethiopian people today. Every time we look at the Ethiopian tricolor flag, or the Lion of Judah, we see the image of that woman, the one who dared to cross the desert to assert her equal standing before the world. And from the commercial empire of the Queen of Sheba, our vision extends to the vast ocean. Her wealth came not only from land, but also from her control of sea routes. Ancient black peoples feared no sea. They had made the Indian Ocean their home long before European ships arrived. Where did these black sailors sail? What civilizations in the Far East did they connect with? The answer lies in the ocean's waves, and we will explore this maritime mystery in the next chapter. Part 7. Before the Silk Road, the uncrowned kings of the Ocean. For many ancient civilizations, the ocean was the edge of the world, the end of life, and the beginning of monstrous horrors. But for the black inhabitants living along the East African coast, from the Horn of Africa to the Red Sea, the ocean was a great highway, an alluring invitation. Western maritime history often glorifies Hippolytus, a 1st-century Greek sailor, as the one who discovered the laws of the Indian monsoon, allowing ships to sail directly from the Red Sea to India. This is a blatant appropriation of credit. Thousands of years before Hippolytus, the black sailors of the kingdoms of Punt and later Aksum understood the rhythm of this ocean like the back of their hand. They knew that in the summer, the wind would blow strongly toward the northeast, propelling their ships swiftly toward the Malabar coast of India. And when winter came, the wind would change direction, gently carrying them back to their homeland. With their boat compartments overflowing with treasures, mastery over this monsoon route transformed the black kingdoms of East Africa into irreplaceable centers of economic power. They were not merely merchants. They were the gatekeepers of luxury. Before Chinese silk reached Rome, before Indian spices flavored the feasts of Roman emperors, they had to pass through the hands of Aksumite merchants. The Aksumite kingdom, located in present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea at its peak, was considered one of the 4 greatest empires in the world, on par with Rome, Persia, and China. Their power lay not only in their military, but also in their vast merchant fleet that dominated the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Minted their own gold coins, a privilege reserved only for economic superpowers, and coins bearing the likeness of these black kings have been found deep within India, a testament to their extensive influence. Imagine the bustling ports of Egypt, where the languages of every nation mingled in the clamor of bargaining. But those in control, those who determined prices, were imposing black merchants. They exported ivory, the white gold coveted throughout the ancient world for carving thrones and idols, They exported rhinoceros horns, tortoiseshell, and especially frankincense. In return, they brought back silk, ceramics, and steel. A globalized trade network had formed early on, and its axis was located in Africa, not Europe. These black sailors did not merely sail along the coast. With astronomical knowledge inherited from their ancestors, they dared to set sail on the vast ocean, navigating by the stars, demonstrating extraordinary skill and courage. This trade was not just about goods, it was an exchange of cultures and ideas. Black sailors arriving in India or Sri Lanka brought not only ivory, but also stories, beliefs, and even their blood. Their presence at eastern seaports became so familiar that it naturally entered local art and literature. In India's famous Ajanta caves, ancient frescoes depicting court scenes in daily life feature dark-skinned figures in luxurious attire, treated as honored guests or nobles, not slaves. This is unspoken evidence of the status of black people in the eyes of the Easterners at that time. They were wealthy partners, representatives of a powerful and distant civilization. The influence of these kings of the sea extended even further, reaching the Chinese imperial court. Ancient texts from the Han and later Tang dynasties recorded envoys from the land of the black people in the far west, carrying exotic tributes such as carved ivory and rare animals. Although the land Silk Road is more often mentioned, the maritime Silk Road, or rather, the spice and ivory route initiated by black people and South Arabs, was actually the most massive and stable route for transporting goods. There were great intermediaries, connecting the two ends of the civilized world, keeping the flow of prosperity uninterrupted. However, this dominance did not last forever. The rise of Islamic empires after the 7th century and the subsequent aggressive invasions by European colonial fleets in the 15th century shattered the old order. The Portuguese, when circling the Cape of Good Hope, were astonished to see magnificent stone cities along the East African coast, such as Kilwa and Mombasa, where people wore Chinese silk and Indian gold jewelry. But instead of admiration, they used cannons to flatten and plunder, then rewrote history as portraying Africans as living in savagery and needing civilization. They deliberately erased the memory of an era when black people were masters of the ocean, who had mapped the world trade before. Columbus or Magellan. An interesting and philosophical detail is the relationship between humans and the sea in the culture of these black sailors. They did not see the sea as an enemy to be conquered, but as a benevolent mother. Their unique sewn boats, which used coconut fiber ropes to connect the wooden planks instead of iron nails, were able to go with the flow of the waves instead of fighting against them, helping them weather storms that would have shattered the rigid boats of the West. This philosophy of going with the flow of nature reflects a profound wisdom, a harmonious way of life that the modern world is now having to relearn. That as the sails of Axum and Punt faded behind the horizon of history, they left behind a great but silent legacy. They proved that Africa's isolation was a false myth. The continent was always open, always facing the open sea, and always an integral part of the ancient global economy. The gold coins of Axum, buried deep in the soil of India, still whispered the story of the uncrowned kings of the ocean, who used their sails to weave prosperity for both East and West. And it was on those ocean-going ships that not only goods were transported, but also religious ideas and divine imagery spread. There is a bold yet compelling theory about the connection between the characteristics of black people and the imagery of one of the greatest religions in the East. Why do the oldest Buddhist statues, or deities in Southeast Asia, often have tightly curled hair clinging to their heads and long ears? Could there be an African Buddhist imprint that we have inadvertently overlooked? We will unravel this fascinating spiritual mystery in the next section. Part 8. The image of Buddhism and the symbol of curly hair. The mystery of the stone estate. We look up at the majestic Buddha statues in the caves of India, Thailand, or even ancient versions in China. The first thing that catches the eye of a discerning observer is the hair. It's not the high bun of a Brahmin ascetic, nor the long flowing hair of the Aryans or Han Chinese. It's hundreds of tightly curled locks, coiled into small bunches close to the scalp, what art calls peppercorn hair. In Buddhist scriptures, this detail is often explained by a touching legend. While the Buddha was meditating under the scorching sun, snails, out of compassion, crawled onto his head and coiled themselves to shield him from the burning heat. It's a beautiful story of compassion. However, from the perspective of art history and anthropology, legend is often a veil woven to rationalize a forgotten reality. That hair, along with the long earlobes, thick lips, and broad nostrils in ancient statues such as those from the Mathura period, faithfully reflects the morphological characteristics of a race that was once revered as the most holy and learned of its time. We need to recall the historical context in which Buddhism originated. Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, came from the Sakya clan in the border region of present-day Nepal and India. In the 6th century BC, this land was not the exclusive domain of the white Aryan people. It was a melting pot of many ethnic groups, with the indigenous African population, the Dravidians and Negrito groups, still making up a large proportion and playing an important role in spiritual life. These indigenous people, with their dark skin and curly hair, were were often considered the keepers of the secrets of heaven and earth. The first There is a compelling historical theory that when the first artisans began sculpting Buddha statues, a taboo for a long time after his death, they did not sculpt them in the likeness of an ordinary Aryan man. They sculpted him in the likeness of Mahapurusha, an idealized figure possessing the characteristics of ancient gods and sacred ancestors who, in the collective consciousness of the time, that had the appearance of black people. The presence of the black mark in Buddhist and Hindu art is not limited to hair. Consider the color. Why are the most powerful gods and sacred statues often sculpted from black stone or painted dark blue like Krishna or ancient Buddha statues? In the symbolic thinking of the ancient world, black was not the color of evil. Black was the color of the vast universe before light was born, the color of fertile land that nourished all things, and the color of metaphysical mystery. Sculpting enlightened beings in black and with Negroid characteristics was a way to honor their eternity and deep roots. Godfrey Higgins, a brilliant 19th century religious scholar, in his seminal work Anacalypsis devoted a large section to demonstrating that all the gods of the ancient world, from Osiris of Egypt to the Buddhas of the East, had black origins. He exclaimed upon seeing the statues in the East India Company's museum, "Why does the god of the East have the curly hair and thick lips of an Ethiopian?" That question was ignored for 2 centuries, because the answer would have overturned the civilized order that the West had painstakingly built. Furthermore, this connection deepens when we look at Southeast Asia. In ancient kingdoms like Champa, Funan, and Angkor, the statues of Buddha and deities also bear the distinct. Part 9. The rise of the Siddhis Habshis from chains to the Tacharonin, the colorful tapestry of Indian history. There is a dark, powerful shadow often overlooked by Western historians, yet one that instilled both fear and awe in the indigenous empires. The Siddhi people, or historically known as the Habis. This name derives from the Arabic al-Habash, meaning Abyssinian modern-day Ethiopia. They were children of the Horn of Africa, swept up in centuries of military slavery across the Indian Ocean. But let's pause for a moment to redefine the concept of slavery in the East at that time, for it was a far cry from the brutal plantation slavery of the Americas that followed. While in the West, black slaves were considered mere tools of labor, mere assets without human rights. In the Islamic dynasties of India, the Habshi were regarded as precious, rough gems, the most loyal and superior war machines. Why did the sultans of the Deccan region crave these black warriors so much? The answer lies in political trust. In a court environment rife with intrigue and treachery, where factions of local nobility and Persian immigrants constantly plotted to overthrow the throne, the Habshi soldiers were the perfect choice. They were outsiders, with no family ties or vested interests with the local powers. They possessed only absolute loyalty to the masters who had bought and nurtured them. Therefore, from the humble beginnings of gatekeepers and personal bodyguards, they quickly rose to the highest levels of power: military commanders, governors of large provinces, and even regents. This is a great paradox of history. Those who were sold into slavery became rulers. Imagine their presence on the battlefield. Contemporary accounts describe the Habshi warriors as moving mountains of ebony, possessing superior physical strength and a tenacious, even reckless fighting spirit. In the scorching heat of the Deccan Plateau, while other armies were exhausted, the Habshi stood firm like rocks. They were masters of guerrilla warfare, of the art of ambush and defense. It is no coincidence that the strongest fortresses and most strategically important positions along the west coast of India were entrusted to black generals. They were not just brute force. They possessed sharp military minds. They knew how to exploit the rugged, mountainous terrain to break the attacks of the vastly more powerful Mughal armies. The rise of the Habshi in India is a testament to a peculiar medieval meritocracy. A young slave from Ethiopia, brought to India, would receive a formal education, learning martial arts, administration, and literature. If he demonstrated talent, no glass ceiling would prevent him from rising. We see that the Habshi not only wielded swords, but also patronized the arts, built temples and mosques. Their architectural contributions remain in Bidar and Bajapur, blending the sophistication of Indian Islamic architecture with the robust, rustic spirit of Africa. They integrated into the local culture, marrying noble women, yet retaining their pride in their heritage. However, power never comes easily. The rise of the black Habshi aristocracy provoked terrible jealousy and envy from other factions, especially the Persian and Turkish nobility. The history of the Deccan kingdoms is a series of bloody power struggles between the foreign faction, including the Habshi, and the indigenous faction. But it was in this crucible of conflict that the character of the black people was forged. They refused to be pawns. They became players. They formed alliances, orchestrated coups, and even deposed and installed kings according to their will. In the 15th and 16th centuries, in the Kingdom of Bengal in the east, or the Kingdom of Ahmednagar in the west, there were periods when real power rested entirely in the hands of black eunuchs and generals. They were the kingmakers, the true builders of monarchies. The story of the Siddhis, the descendants of the Habshi people today, is not just a story of the past, but a lesson in survival and adaptation. Uprooted from their homeland, stripped of their identity, they refused to be overwhelmed. They turned disadvantage into advantage. transforming their enslaved status into a springboard to power. They proved that human dignity lies not in origin, but in action. When the Habshi soldiers stood on the ramparts, looking down at their besieging enemies, they did not see with the eyes of fearful slaves, but with the eyes of proud conquerors. They knew that, in this foreign land, swords and intellect were their only passports to respect. But among all the military legacies left by the Habshi people, one legend stands tall at sea, never once bowing to any enemy, not even the powerful European colonial powers with their large ships and mighty guns. It is the ultimate symbol of black naval power, an invincible fortress island. We are talking about Janjira, the Black Pearl of the Arabian Sea. How did a group of black sailors and warriors manage to build and defend this fortress for centuries, defeating the British, the Portuguese, and the mighty Maratha Empire? Let's set sail to witness this military masterpiece firsthand in the next section. Part 10. The Invincible Fortress of Janjira, the Black Pearl of the Ocean amidst the roaring waves of the Arabian Sea. About 165 kilometers south of Mumbai, a magnificent structure rises from the water like a giant sea monster resting. This is Janjira. The name comes from the Arabic word Jazira, meaning island. But for those who have tried to seize it, the name meant despair. For over 300 years, Janjira stood there, proud and alone, defying the most powerful empires of the Indian subcontinent and even the fleets of Western colonial powers. Its masters were none other than the city people, descendants of Ethiopian sailors and warriors who proved themselves not only skilled horsemen and archers on land, but also unparalleled masters of naval warfare. Look at the structure of Janjira to see the military genius of these black people. The fort wasn't built on an island, but rather encompassed an entire 22-acre rocky island. The walls, reaching 12 meters in height, rose directly from the sea, constructed from massive granite blocks using a secret mortar mixture of lime, sand, palm sugar, and molasses. This bond was so strong that, after centuries of saltwater erosion and thousands of artillery shells, it remained steadfast. The fort had 19 rounded bastions, allowing the cannons to fire in all directions, creating a deadly fire net that surrounded any ship that dared approach. But the most miraculous feature, demonstrating the city's people's profound understanding of survival, was the two natural freshwater lakes located right in the heart of the fort. Surrounded by the salty sea, they still had an abundant supply of fresh water to survive sieges that lasted for years. Was this a blessing from nature, or a reward for the ingenuity of those who dared to live in the heart of the ocean? The history of Janjira is a history of failed sieges. The city people's greatest and most persistent enemy was the Maratha Empire, the most powerful indigenous force in 17th century India under the leadership of the great Shivaji. Shivaji, who had defeated the Mughals and conquered most of the forts in western India, considered Janjira a thorn in his side, the only blemish on his illustrious record. He mobilized tens of thousands of troops, built counter-fortresses on the coast, and even his son Samhoji went to the desperate effort of reclaiming land from the sea to create a road to the island for attack. But all was in vain. The city people, under the command of their skilled city admirals, transformed Janjira into an impregnable floating fortress. They glided in small, light boats, launching lightning attacks on the flanks of the enemy's massive fleet before retreating safely behind the stone walls. The Marathas' inability to defeat Janjira was so great that it became an obsession in Maharashtra folklore, conquering the whole world, yet losing to a black stone. Not only the indigenous powers, but even the European colonial powers with their superior weaponry had to bow before the cities. The Portuguese, British, and Dutch, who proclaimed themselves masters of the seas, all coveted the strategic importance of Janjira, but instead of direct confrontation and facing defeat, they were forced to choose compromise. The British in Bombay had to sign peace treaties and at times even pay protection money to ensure their ships could safely pass through the waters controlled by the cities. This was a powerful blow to the pride of white colonialism. While in Africa and the Americas, black people were enslaved. In this region, Europeans had to bow before the flag of black kings. The citizens Janjira were not marginalized. They were key players on the political chessboard, holding the position of admiral in the Mughal Empire's navy and controlling the pilgrimage route to Mecca. Janjira's strength lay not only in its stone walls, but also in its fearsome arsenal. Even today, visitors to the fort can admire the Kalo Bangadi, the third largest cannon in India. Cast from a mixture of 5 metals, this cannon possessed exceptional heat resistance and an incredibly long range. Legend says that when the Kalo Bangadi fired, its blast echoed for dozens of miles, terrifying the enemy before the projectile even hit its target. Possessing and operating such heavy weaponry required an extremely high level of technical skill and military organization, completely refuting the notion of backwardness in African warriors. The city people combined their innate physical strength with the latest military technological advancements of the era to defend their kingdom. Within those fortified walls lay not just military camps, but a thriving microcosm of society. The Nawab kings of Janjira built palaces, mosques, and bustling residential areas. They created a unique hybrid culture where African Swahili blended with Indian Marathi and Urdu. They patronized music, art, and architecture, Despite being devout Muslims, they tolerated and protected Hindu inhabitants within their territory, provided they remained loyal. This wise and tolerant governance allowed the city people to maintain popular support and the stability of their kingdom for centuries. Even as surrounding empires crumbled and disintegrated, Yanjiro was never conquered by force. It only opened its gates when India gained independence in 1947 and was incorporated into the Federation in 1948 through diplomatic means. This means that, throughout its history, the city flag has never been lowered by the enemy. That fortified island stands as an eternal monument to the indomitable spirit of the black people. It is compelling proof that, given the opportunity and the right to self-determination, black people can build the strongest fortifications, defending their sovereignty against the world's most powerful forces. When the tide recedes, revealing the main gate of the fort with its bas-relief depicting a tiger pouncing on 4 elephants, a symbol of the overwhelming power of the city people, we cannot help but tremble with awe. The sons of Africa had traveled far, from the tropical forests to this distant sea, carving their names into the stone, and the waves, asserting that they were kings, masters of their own destiny. But the story of black rulers in India doesn't end at sea. On land, there was an extraordinary man, a slave who rose to become the most fearsome enemy of the great Mughal emperor. A military genius whom even his enemies called the teacher. Who was he? Let's move on to meet Malik Amber, the greatest king builder of the Deccan region. Part 12. The Black Sultans of Bengal, a kingdom of darkness and ambition in the 15th century. Bengal was one of the wealthiest and most prosperous Islamic kingdoms in the Eastern world. Its prosperity attracted merchants from all over, and with them came thousands of Habshi slaves from Ethiopia who were brought to serve in the royal court. Why did the Bengali kings favor the Habshi so much? The age-old reason remained: trust. In a court where factions of the local nobility constantly vied for power, the black soldiers and eunuchs, those without family or local roots, were considered the safest shield. They were entrusted with the most crucial positions, protecting the throne, managing the treasury, and commanding the army. But history has proven a cruel rule: when you give a sword to a bodyguard to protect you, you are also giving him the ability to hold that sword to your throat. Power is like a sweet poison, and the Habshi of Bengal, after years of witnessing the weakness of their masters, decided they no longer wanted to be behind the throne. They wanted to sit on it. A bloody turning point occurred in 1487, a year etched in Bengali history in the red of betrayal. Babak Shah, the commander-in-chief of the royal guard, and an ambitious Habshi, assassinated the last king of the Ilyas Shahi dynasty. This act was not merely an assassination, it was a revolution from within. For the first time in the history of Islam in India, a group previously considered a lowly slave class openly overturned the social order to establish direct rule. This period, lasting from 1487 to 1493, is known by historians as the Habshi reign. For many contemporaries, it was a terrible cultural shock, a disruption of the natural order. But if we set aside prejudices about social standing, what can we see in this short but turbulent reign? History often portrays this period as a dark era of violence and lawlessness, but that is a one-sided view of the defeated. The truth is far more complex. Among the 4 black sultans who ruled Bengal for a mere 7 years, some were tyrannical, but others were exceptional rulers. The most prominent example is Safaddin Firuz Shah. He was not a bloodthirsty tyrant, he was a builder and a refined patron of the arts. Under his reign, Bengal's architecture and culture were not destroyed but flourished with unique characteristics. The magnificent Firuz Minor Tower in the ancient city of Goa is his enduring legacy. This 5-story tower is not merely a religious structure, it is a symbol of the aspirations of the black people. Standing majestically amidst the vast green plains, Firuz Minor is a proud declaration. We, the sons and daughters from distant Africa, have come here, have ruled, and have left an indelible mark on this land. The rise of black sultans in Bengal also demonstrated the remarkable flexibility of the Islamic social structure at the time. Despite their slave origins, once in power they were recognized by the clergy and officials, provided they upheld their faith and maintained the borders. Safaddin Firuz Shah is described as a just ruler, generous to the poor and strict with corrupt officials. He strived to build a solid foundation for his dynasty by integrating cultures, minting coins bearing his name, and constructing mosques. The image of a black king seated on his throne at Goa, receiving tribute from envoys and issuing edicts in Persian, is proof that leadership ability does not depend on skin color or origin. The Habshi of Bengal proved they were perfectly capable of operating a complex state apparatus, managing the economy, and upholding the law, rather than simply wielding swords and killing. However, the tragedy of the Habshi dynasty lay in the very origins of their power. Having seized the throne through violence, they lived in constant suspicion and insecurity. The shadow of betrayal haunted those who had betrayed them. Internal purges, the jealousy of the old aristocracy, and the lack of a broad popular base made the dynasty unsustainable. After the death of Safaddin Firuz Shah, chaos returned. The last ruler of this lineage is described as a ruthless tyrant who pushed the Habshi rule to the brink of collapse with his harsh policies. In 1494, a major rebellion led by Vizier Sayyid Hussain ended the Black Dynasty in Bengal. Its outcome was a large-scale massacre and expulsion. Thousands of Habshi were killed or driven from Bengal, forced to flee westward or southward, carrying with them the resentment of an unfulfilled dream of kingship. Although the reign of the Black Sultans collapsed as swiftly as a tropical storm, its repercussions endure. It permanently shattered the illusion of absolute subservience to slaves. It forced subsequent dynasties to reconsider the status of black soldiers. They were lions, capable of protecting you from wolves, but also capable of tearing you apart if not treated fairly. Furthermore, the architectural works they left behind, an artistic style blending the robustness of Africa with the sophistication of Bengal, have become an integral part of the Delta's cultural heritage. The red-fired bricks of the Firuz Minor Towers remain, telling the story of a time when black men ruled one of the world's richest lands. Looking back at this turbulent period of history, we shouldn't just see blood and violence. We should see the intense yearning for freedom and the extraordinary adaptability of humanity. From villagers in Ethiopia, abducted, sold across the ocean, stripped of their identities, they refused to surrender to fate. They rose to the highest peaks of social power, albeit for a brief moment in history. The Black Sultans of Bengal are extreme but compelling examples of how history is never a straight line. It is full of unexpected turns, where the weakest can become the strongest, and as the echoes of the Bengal coups fade into the past, our journey of discovery continues. African blood flows not only in the veins of Muslim kings or Indian warriors. Further southeast, in the tropical monsoon lands of Southeast Asia, where rainforests and great rivers meet, lies a more ancient, deeper trace of the presence of a race of color that shaped the region's first civilization. These were not enslaved or immigrant warriors, but indigenous inhabitants, the true masters of this land. We are talking about the Funan Kingdom and the mysteries of South Asian origins. Let us brush aside the dust of time and delve into the roots of our black brothers and sisters in Southeast Asia in the next section. Part 12. The Black Sultans of Bengal, a kingdom of darkness and ambition in the 15th century. Bengal was one of the wealthiest and most prosperous Islamic kingdoms in the Eastern world. Its prosperity attracted merchants from all over, and with them came thousands of Habshi slaves from Ethiopia who were brought to serve in the royal court. Why did the Bengali kings favor the Habshi so much? The age-old reason remained: trust. In a court where factions of the local nobility constantly vied for power, the black soldiers and eunuchs, those without family or local roots, were considered the safest shield. They were entrusted with the most crucial positions, protecting the throne, managing the treasury, and commanding the army. But history has proven a cruel rule. When you give a sword to a bodyguard to protect you, you are also giving him the ability to hold that sword to your throat. Power is like a sweet poison, and the Habshi of Bengal, after years of witnessing the weakness of their masters, decided they no longer wanted to be behind the throne. They wanted to sit on it. A bloody turning point occurred in 1487, a year etched in Bengali history in the red of betrayal. Babak Shah, the commander-in-chief of the royal guard and an ambitious Habshi, assassinated the last king of the Ilyas Shahi dynasty. This act was not merely an assassination, it was a revolution from within. For the first time in the history of Islam in India, a group previously considered a lowly slave class openly overturned the social order to establish direct rule. This period, lasting from 1487 to 1493, is known by historians as the Habshi reign. For many contemporaries, it was a terrible cultural shock, a disruption of the natural order. But if we set aside prejudices about social standing, what can we see in this short but turbulent reign? History often portrays this period as a dark era of violence and lawlessness, but that is a one-sided view of the defeated. The truth is far more complex. Among the 4 black sultans who ruled Bengal for a mere 7 years, some were tyrannical, but others were exceptional rulers. The most prominent example is Saifuddin Firuz Shah. He was not a bloodthirsty tyrant, he was a builder and a refined patron of the arts. Under his reign, Bengal's architecture and culture were not destroyed but flourished with unique characteristics. The magnificent Firuz Minor Tower in the ancient city of Goa is his enduring legacy. This 5-story tower is not merely a religious structure, it is a symbol of the aspirations of the black people. Standing majestically amidst the vast green plains, Firuz Minor is a proud declaration. The sons and daughters from distant Africa have come here, have ruled, and have left an indelible mark on this land. The rise of black sultans in Bengal also demonstrated the remarkable flexibility of the Islamic social structure at the time. Despite their slave origins, once in power they were recognized by the clergy and officials, provided they upheld their faith and maintained the borders. Saifuddin Firuz Shah is described as a just ruler, generous to the poor and strict with corrupt officials. He strived to build a solid foundation for his dynasty by integrating cultures, minting coins bearing his name, and constructing mosques. The image of a black king seated on his throne at Goa, receiving tribute from envoys and issuing edicts in Persian, is proof that leadership ability does not depend on skin color or origin. The Habshi of Bengal proved they were perfectly capable of operating a complex state apparatus, managing the economy, and upholding the law, rather than simply wielding swords and killing. However, the tragedy of the Habshi dynasty lay in the very origins of their power. having seized the throne through violence, they lived in constant suspicion and insecurity. The shadow of betrayal haunted those who had betrayed them. Internal purges, the jealousy of the old aristocracy, and the lack of a broad popular base made the dynasty unsustainable. After the death of Saifuddin Firuz Shah, chaos returned. The last ruler of this lineage, Shamsuddin Muzaffar Shah, is described as a ruthless tyrant who pushed the Habshi rule to the brink of collapse with his harsh policies. In 1494, a major rebellion led by Vizier Syed Hussein ended the Black Dynasty in Bengal. Its outcome was a large-scale massacre and expulsion. Thousands of Habshi were killed or driven from Bengal, forced to flee westward or southward, carrying with them the resentment of an unfulfilled dream of kingship. Although the reign of the Black Sultans collapsed as swiftly as a tropical storm, its repercussions endure. It permanently shattered the illusion of absolute subservience to slaves. It forced subsequent dynasties to reconsider the status of black soldiers. They were lions, capable of protecting you from wolves, but also capable of tearing you apart if not treated fairly. Furthermore, the architectural works they left behind, an artistic style blending the robustness of Africa with the sophistication of Bengal, have become an integral part of the Delta's cultural heritage. The red-fired bricks of the Firuz Minor Towers remain, telling the story of a time when black men ruled one of the world's richest lands. Looking back at this turbulent period of history, we shouldn't just see blood and violence. We should see the intense yearning for freedom and the extraordinary adaptability of humanity. From villagers in Ethiopia, abducted, sold across the ocean, stripped of their identities, they refused to surrender to fate. They rose to the highest peaks of social power, albeit for a brief moment in history. The Black Sultans of Bengal are extreme but compelling examples of how history is never a straight line. It is full of unexpected turns, where the weakest can become the strongest. And as the echoes of the Bengal coups fade into the past, our journey of discovery continues. African blood flows not only in the veins of Muslim kings or Indian warriors, further southeast, in the tropical monsoon lands of Southeast Asia, where rainforests and great rivers meet, lies a more ancient, deeper trace of the presence of a race of color that shaped the region's first civilization. These were not enslaved or immigrant warriors, but indigenous inhabitants, the true masters of this land. We are talking about the Fanon Kingdom and the mysteries of South Asian origins. Let's brush aside the dust of time and delve into the roots of our black brothers and sisters in Southeast Asia in the next section. Part 14. The Whitewashing of History, the Perfect Crime of Intellect. Let's begin with a great paradox of the European Enlightenment. In the 18th and 19th centuries, while Western philosophers were enthusiastically discussing liberty, equality, and human rights, their empires were operating the most brutal slave trade in human history. How could a society that claimed to be civilized, believing in God and morality, accept the abduction of millions of people, chaining them and treating them worse than animals? To resolve this moral contradiction, they needed a justification. They could not admit that they were enslaving the descendants of Sumerian kings, the architects of the pyramids, or the great merchants of the Indian Ocean. If they acknowledged that black people had a history and a civilization, then their enslavement was an unforgivable crime. Therefore, a massive campaign to erase black people's past was launched. Its goal was simple and cold: to portray black people as a race without history, barbarians in need of being civilized by white people. The most brutal battlefield of this cultural war was Egypt. When Napoleon arrived in Egypt, the scholars accompanying him were stunned by the grandeur of the structures, but they were also perplexed by the anthropological features on the statues of the Sphinx and pharaohs: broad noses, thick lips, and the skull structure of Africans. Count Volney, a French historian accompanying the delegation, exclaimed in astonishment that the very race considered enslaved and inferior in Europe was the one that had taught the West what civilization was. But this honest statement was immediately suppressed. An attempt to separate Egypt from Africa was made. Western scholars redraw maps, placing Egypt in the Middle East or Mediterranean region, creating the concept of Hamites, white or dark-skinned, to label the ancient Egyptians, completely denying their blood ties to the Nubians and other peoples south of the Sahara Desert. The noses of the statues were mercilessly chiseled away, not merely by the ravages of time or military force, but as a deliberate act to erase any trace of their ethnicity, so that future generations would no longer recognize the true faces of the builders. This bleaching storm didn't stop at the Nile. It spread to India and the East. The emergence of the Aryan invasion theory in the 19th century is another prime example. When the British ruled India and discovered the richness of Sanskrit and the profoundness of the Vedas, they couldn't accept that the indigenous people of color were the authors of these masterpieces. They constructed a hypothesis that all the finest aspects of Indian civilization were brought by a white Aryan race from the north, conquering and civilizing the barbaric Dravidian people. In this way, they not only usurped the indigenous people's authorship but also legitimized British colonial rule as a continuation of their white Aryan brethren. The glorious achievements of the Indus Valley were ignored. Black deities were repainted blue or white in paintings, and history became a tool to reinforce the belief in white superiority. Even in the realm of religious art, whitewashing occurs subtly and persistently. The image of Buddha, as we analyzed earlier, with his curly hair and African features, has gradually been transformed over the centuries to suit the aesthetics of the receiving cultures. But in the West, this transformation takes on a distinctly racist tone. Jesus, a man born in the Middle East, who should surely have had dark skin and the hair of a desert dweller, has been redrawn as a white man with blue eyes and golden hair. This alteration of the Savior's image has a terrible psychological impact. It instills in the subconscious of billions of people that holiness, power, and ultimate beauty belong to the color white. Black is relegated to the color of the devil, of sin, and of ignorance. Another powerful tool in this process is the silence of education. For hundreds of years, world history textbooks were compiled according to a predetermined structure. Civilization began in Greece and Rome, then spread throughout the world. Africa was depicted as a mysterious and empty black continent, where nothing happened until Europeans arrived. Powerful kingdoms like Mali, Songhai, Great Zimbabwe, or Axum were only mentioned in vague footnotes, or attributed to extraterrestrials or some lost white race. The renowned philosopher Hegel even arrogantly declared, "Africa is not a part of world history. It has no movement or development to show." That statement became a guiding principle for Western academia, shutting the door of curiosity for generations of students to the past of black people. The consequences of this historical whitewashing are devastating not only for black people but for all of humanity. For black people, it creates a psychological trauma that is passed down through generations. When a child grows up without seeing the image of their ancestors in glorious books, when they only see their like-minded individuals in the roles of slaves or criminals, they lose their core pride and self-respect. They are deprived of their historical identity. For the world, it creates a distorted and incomplete understanding. We have built our knowledge base on half-truths, and half-truths are often more dangerous than lies. We have missed the opportunity to learn from the philosophies, social models, and scientific achievements that black civilizations have contributed. However, the truth possesses the tenacious vitality of a weed. Even buried beneath layers of deceitful concrete, it still finds a way to reach the sunlight. The 20th and 21st centuries marked the awakening of archaeology and genetics. Modern DNA tests do not lie. They confirm the African origins of humanity and the close connection of ancient civilizations to the continent. Newly excavated sites and deciphered ancient texts have begun to overturn old prejudiced assumptions. Martin Burnell's book Black Athena and the research of Cheikh Anta Diop have created seismic shifts in the academic world, forcing people to reconsider the role of black people in the formation of Greek and Egyptian civilizations. The white paint is gradually peeling away, revealing the authentic, rough, yet vibrant colors of the past. Exposing historical whitewashing is not an act of revenge or incitement of racial hatred. It is an act of restoring justice. It is about restoring the names of the unknown, returning the crowns to forgotten kings, and restoring truth to humanity. We need to rewrite textbooks, change the way museums view things, and most importantly, change our own perceptions. We need to understand that human civilization is a grand symphony played by many instruments and many ethnic groups, in which the melody of black people is not a discordant interlude but the dominant powerful drumbeat from the very first beat. When the veil of lies is lifted, we see not only the past, but also the future. A future where people respect one another not out of charity, but out of a deep understanding of shared origins and equal contributions. Our journey to rediscover the forgotten black dynasties is drawing to a close, but what it reveals is boundless. We have traversed space and time, through glory and bitterness. Now, let us sit together in this final chapter, to summarize what their enduring legacy is and what message the black spirits wish to convey to the modern world. The story is not over. It has only turned to a new chapter within each of us. Part 15. An everlasting legacy, a bloodline that never sells. A piece. History at its deepest level is not a record of inanimate ruins, but a story of ongoing life. When we speak of the collapse of Eastern black dynasties, we often picture a complete end, a tragic conclusion. But that is a fatal mistake. Political empires may disintegrate, but people and cultures do not. They do not vanish into thin air. They dissolve. They permeate every cell of modern societies, becoming an inseparable part of contemporary Eastern identity. Look deep into the eyes of the Siddhis of Gujarat, India, or Karnataka, who still dance to wild Damal and Sufi festivals. Their drums are not just music, they are the heartbeat of Africa, still beating strongly in the heart of South Asia 500 years later. They are living museums, preserving the language, customs, and pride of their ancestors, such as Malik, Amber, and the sailors of Abyssinia. Their existence is compelling proof that black blood is not a mere visitor, but a deeply rooted son of India. That legacy is not only present through bloodlines, but also deeply ingrained in culture and spirituality. We often fail to realize that many of the beauties we take for granted as Eastern actually bear the profound imprint of black people. Listen to the jazz or blues melodies of African Americans and compare them to the folk songs of the cities or Makroni communities in Pakistan. This unsettling similarity is not accidental. It is the echo of the same pain, the same yearning for freedom, the same artistic soul that crossed the ocean on slave ships heading in two different directions of the world, one to the west, the other to the east. If the West has jazz to tell of sorrow, the East has the leviatans to tell of strength. Black people have enriched human culture not only with their labor, but also with their rich souls. They taught the East how to blend pungent spices, how to build fortresses at sea, and how to converse with the gods through enchanting dances. Furthermore, the story of the forgotten Black dynasties leaves a profound philosophical legacy regarding the concepts of race and boundaries. In the ancient world we have just traversed, skin color was not the fateful dividing wall that the modern world mistakenly believes. A black slave could become king in India, a black woman could be worshipped as a goddess in Arabia, and black merchants were respected in the Chinese court. That world, though brutal, was more open and flexible than we imagine. It reminds us that racial discrimination is not a natural human instinct, but an artificial construct created later to serve greed and power. When we restore the history of black people in the East, we are breaking down that toxic structure. We are demonstrating that humanity is a continuous, blending, and unified flow. There is no such thing as a superior or inferior race. There are only different opportunities and historical circumstances. The most enduring legacy these dynasties left behind is hope and self-awareness. For black communities worldwide, knowing that their ancestors were not merely victims of plantation slavery, but also builders of civilization, brilliant rulers, and indomitable warriors, is an invaluable source of spiritual strength. It helps them hold their heads high, shedding the inferiority complex imposed by colonial history. The images of Malakamba, the Queen of Sheba, and the Sultans of Bengal serve as beacons, reminding them of their own limitless potential, that in their blood flow the genes of kings, not just the scars of the whip. And for non-black people, this story is a lesson in humility and gratitude. We recognize that the civilization we enjoy is the shared achievement of humanity, including the blood and sacrifices of our brothers and sisters of color. Today, as new excavations are underway, as ancient texts are being deciphered using modern technology, the dust of time is gradually being blown away. We are witnessing the revival of a glorious past. But this revival is not to serve extremist or divisive ideologies, but to heal. When we see the Buddha statue with curly hair, when we admire the Janjira fortress in the middle of the ocean, we see not only the past, but also the future. A future where every child, regardless of skin color, can find their own image in history textbooks as masters of the world. Black people once ruled the East, not to dominate others but to coexist and thrive. That spirit of symbiosis, that spirit of harmony with nature and humanity, is the most precious legacy that the modern world longs to rediscover. Those dynasties may have fallen asleep beneath the earth, but their dreams remain alive. They awaken in every breath of humanity, in the unceasing aspiration for progress. We, living in the 21st century, are the inheritors of that legacy. Our responsibility is not to blindly worship the past, but to understand it in order to live better in the present. Let the story of the Black Eastern dynasties become part of humanity's intellectual baggage, a testament that strength lies not in skin color, but in will. And history never dies. It only awaits to be told in a more authentic voice. The river of history has flowed through 15 chapters, carrying with it the sediment of memories, pain, and glory. Now, it flows into the vast ocean of the present, merging into the boundless sea of the future. But before closing this chapter, let me, your diligent storyteller, send one final message, a heartfelt plea to my companions who have patiently listened to the echoes of the past.